The question came as the sun melted into the horizon, painting the West Texas sky in shades of copper and gold. Marcus Ramon sat on the weathered porch of his small ranch outside Midland, a cold Shonnerbox sweating in his weathered hand, watching contrails streak across the darkening sky. F-14s from the nearby airbase, their engines a distant whisper that only a pilot's ear could truly appreciate. His grandson Tyler sat beside him, 16 years old, and restless with the kind of energy that comes from holding an acceptance letter to the Air Force Academy and not knowing what to do with it. The boy had been quiet all evening, the letter folded and refolded in his pocket, until Marcus thought it might disintegrate from the friction of his anxiety. Finally, as the first stars began their vigil overhead, Tyler found his voice. "Grandpa," he said, and there was something fragile in the word. "Were you scared when you flew?" Marcus took a long pull from his beer, feeling the cold liquid trace a path down his throat. The question hung in the air between them like smoke, and for a moment the only sound was the evening breeze moving through the mesquite trees that bordered his property. He was 68 years old, his hair more silver than black, his hands bearing the calluses of a man who had spent the last 8 years rebuilding engines in his auto shop. But when he closed his eyes, he could still feel it. The weight of a fight helmet, the smell of jet fuel mixing with desert sand, the way your heart beats differently at 30,000 feet, each pulse a reminder that you are somewhere humans were never meant to be. "Scared," Marcus said finally, his accent still carrying the rhythms of Arabic even after all these years in Texas. "No, not at first." He set down his beer and looked at his grandson, really looked at him. The boy had his father's eyes. Marcus's son Omar, who had done well in this country, become an engineer like he dreamed, married a good woman from Houston. Tyler was half Iraqi, half American, all future, and he wanted to fly. "I was the best pilot in my squadron," Marcus continued. "Soviet trained, 3 confirmed kills. I thought American pilots were soft, pampered boys who couldn't fly without computers holding their hands. I thought their reputation was propaganda, exaggeration, the kind of myth powerful countries build to intimidate their enemies." Tyler leaned forward, his Dr. Pepper forgotten on the porch railing. "So when did that change?" Marcus felt something tighten in his chest the way it always did when he let himself remember. "November 19th, 1982. The day I heard a sound that changed everything I believed about war, about America, and about myself. The day I heard a tone from 100 miles away and realized in that instant that I was already dead." The boy's eyes widened. "What kind of tone?" "The tone that means something is hunting you from an impossible distance. The tone that means somewhere far beyond what your eyes can see, beyond what your radar can detect, beyond what your training prepared you for an enemy has locked onto your aircraft. And you have maybe 60 seconds before a missile traveling at 4 times the speed of sound turns you into fire and falling metal." Marcus stood his knees protesting the movement in the way they always did now and walked to the barn. He returned with a wooden box, its surface scarred and worn, the kind of box that has traveled too far and seen too much. Inside were patches from another life, Soviet Air Force insignia, Iraqi squadron emblems, medals that meant something once in a country that no longer existed in the way he remembered it, and photographs. He pulled one out and held it up to the porch light. A young man, maybe 32 years old, standing beside a MiG-23 fighter jet. The man in the photograph wore a Soviet-style flight suit, his smile confident to the point of arrogance, his posture that of someone who had never doubted his own abilities. The aircraft behind him was gray and angular, its variable geometry wings swept back, looking every bit the Cold War predator it was designed to be. "That's me," Marcus said. "1982, Major Marcus Ramon, call sign Scorpion 1. I thought I was invincible. I thought Soviet training and Soviet aircraft made me untouchable." He pulled out another photograph, this one much later. The man in this picture looked like he had been hollowed out and rebuilt wrong. Thinner, older than his years, standing in front of an American VA hospital in civilian clothes, the kind of expression on his face that spoke of distances traveled that had nothing to do with miles. And that's me 5 years later. After I learned what it means to face something you cannot fight, after I learned what it means to survive when all your training and all your confidence mean nothing. Tyler picked up the first photograph, studying the face of his grandfather as a younger man. What happened between these 2 pictures? That my boy is a long story, but if you're going to wear that uniform, if you're going to sit in a cockpit and hold the power of life and death in your hands, then you need to hear it, all of it, because the lesson isn't about the machines we fly. It's about the men who fly them and what they choose to do with that power. Marcus settled back into his chair, the wood creaking under his weight in a way that sounded almost like a sigh. The stars were coming out in force now, the way they only did in the Texas desert, far from the light pollution of the cities. Overhead, another F-16 traced its way across the sky, and Marcus watched it with the eye of someone who understood every movement, every angle, every choice the pilot was making up there in the cold dark. By the end of this story, he said, you'll understand three things. First, why the F-14 Tomcat was the most feared aircraft in the world during my time. Second, why American kindness was more powerful than American weapons. And third, why I'm proud to call Texas home, even though I once tried to kill Americans. He paused, letting that sink in. Tyler said nothing, but his hand had stopped fidgeting with the acceptance letter. If any of you watching know someone who flew Tomcats, Marcus continued speaking now to an audience beyond just his grandson, his voice taking on the rhythm of a man who had told this story before and knew its shape. Or if you served in the Gulf, or if you knew someone who faced what I faced, I'd be honored to hear your stories. Because this isn't just my story, it's the story of a generation of pilots who learned that the future of warfare wasn't going to be won by the bravest or the most skilled, but by whoever had the better machine and the wisdom to use it right. He took another drink, the beer warming now in the Texas heat even as the air began to cool. It starts in winter, 1976, Krasnodar, Soviet Union. I was 21 years old and I thought I was going to learn how to rule the sky. The memory came back sharp and clear, the way certain memories do when they mark the boundary between who you were and who you became. The Academy of Fire, the Soviet Air Force Academy, sprawling across the frozen Russian landscape like a monument to military precision. Everything there was gray. Gray buildings, gray sky, gray uniforms that smelled of wool and discipline. The cold was the kind that went through your clothes and settled in your bones, the kind that made you understand why the Russians had never been conquered by waiting armies in winter. Marcus had been selected from dozens of Iraqi pilots, chosen because of his test scores and his family connections. His father was a colonel in the Iraqi military, his mother a teacher who had made sure her sons understood that education was the path to advancement. Iraq was modernizing, transforming itself under new leadership, and they needed pilots who could fly the sophisticated aircraft the Soviets were willing to sell. The training was brutal, not cruel but relentlessly demanding in the way only Soviet military training could be. Up at 4:30 in the morning regardless of weather, physical conditioning until your muscles screamed. Classroom instruction in aerodynamics, weapon systems, tactics, then the flying, always the flying. The instructors were veterans men who had flown in conflicts Marcus had only read about. They taught with a particular philosophy, one that Marcus absorbed like a man dying of thirst absorbs water. American pilots are soft, they said, showing footage of the Vietnam War where simple MiG-21s had shot down technologically superior F-4 Phantoms. They grow up comfortable in a country where everything is easy. You grow up hard in a region where weakness means death. That makes you better. That makes you dangerous. They drilled into their students the concept of ground-controlled intercept. Your controllers on the ground have better radar than you do, they said. They see the whole battlefield. Trust the system, follow their vectors, get close to the enemy, use your superior maneuverability, take the shot. Numbers matter. One American pilot against 3 Soviet-trained pilots. The American loses every time. Marcus believed it all. Why wouldn't he? It made sense. It fit with everything he knew about the world. And when he flew, when he took those MiG-21 trainers up into the gray Russian sky, when he executed perfect intercepts and fired on target drones and landed with the precision of a surgeon's knife, he could feel it. The rightness of it. The certainty. By 1978, he graduated top of his class. The Soviets gave him a medal, Outstanding Pilot, engraved on its face in Cyrillic letters he had learned to read. He returned to Iraq absolutely certain of one thing. Soviet training combined with Soviet aircraft equaled victory. It was mathematics. It was inevitable. But the question, the one that would haunt him for the next decade, was already forming, even if he didn't know it yet. If Soviet training was so superior, if their tactics were so much better, If their philosophy of warfare was so advanced, then why did he end up here on a porch in Texas teaching his American grandson about the day everything he believed turned to ash in his mouth? The answer he would learn had everything to do with a machine built on the other side of the world, designed by people who approached warfare from an entirely different direction. But that would come later. For now, in 1980, Marcus Ramon was 30 years old and at the peak of his confidence. He had been flying operational missions for 2 years, patrolling Iraqi airspace training, newer pilots becoming known in his squadron as someone with skill and judgment. He was married to Layla, a woman from Baghdad, who was as smart as she was patient with a husband who spent more time in the sky than on the ground. They had 2 sons, Omar, who was 8, and Ali, who was 5, and Marcus would write them letters when he was deployed, telling them about the honor of serving, about protecting your country, about being a warrior. Then on September 22, 1980, Iraq invaded Iran. Marcus remembered the briefing the night before. The commanders had been confident, almost casual. Iran was in chaos after their revolution the year before. The Shah had been overthrown. Many of their best pilots had fled the country or been executed by the new Islamic government. Their air force was disorganized, lacking spare parts, barely functional. This would be quick, they said, a surgical strike to settle border disputes and secure vital territory. Weeks maybe, months at most. The war would last 8 years. Marcus flew his first combat mission 3 days after the invasion. An air superiority patrol over the newly captured territory, flying his MiG-23ML, the most modern fighter Iraq possessed. The mission was uneventful. They saw no Iranian aircraft. They returned home feeling like they had wasted fuel. But then the missions got more serious. Iranian F-5 Tigers started appearing small and agile. American-built fighters flown by pilots who were angry and desperate. Marcus had his first engagement in early October, a turning dogfight at 12,000 feet that ended with an F-5 smoking and spiraling down into the desert below. He didn't see the pilot eject. He told himself it didn't matter. This was war. 3 weeks later, he shot down an F-4 Phantom. This one was more difficult. The Phantom was fast and could carry an impressive weapons load, and its crew fought smart, using altitude and speed to their advantage. But Marcus was smarter. He anticipated their moves, positioned himself perfectly, and fired an R-23 missile from 25 miles away. The missile tracked true, and the Phantom came apart in a ball of orange fire. This time, he did see the ejection seats fire 2 parachutes blossoming white against the brown earth. He circled once, making sure they were down safely, then returned to base. They gave him a medal, promoted him to major, called him Scorpion for the way he struck fast and deadly. His squadron mates looked at him with respect, and the younger pilots asked him for advice. Marcus felt for the first time in his life like he had found his purpose. He was good at this. More than good. He was exceptional. March 1981 brought his third kill. Another F-4, this time in a close-range turning fight that tested every hour of his training. The Phantom pilot was skilled, forcing Marcus to use every trick he knew. But in the end, Marcus got position, fired an R-60 aphid infrared missile from close range, and watched it track the Phantom's heat signature straight into the left engine. The aircraft staggered, smoking, and began to descend. Both crew members ejected safely. Marcus waggled his wings as he passed, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. That night, sitting in the officers' mess eating rice and lamb with his fellow pilots, Marcus felt something he had never quite felt before. Invincibility. Like he had unlocked some secret of the universe, some fundamental truth about his own capabilities. His wingman called him Scorpion and meant it as a compliment of the highest order. He had 3 confirmed kills. He was 29 years old. He believed with the kind of certainty that only the young and lucky can sustain that he could beat anyone. American, Iranian, it didn't matter. He had skill, he had training, he had courage. The answer came in whispers at first. Rumors that spread through the squadron in early 1982. The way rumors do in any military organization passed from pilot to pilot, in the moments between missions, in the crew room, during weather delays, in the bars where they went to forget what they had seen and what they had done. Lieutenant Kareem was the first to tell the story. He was a good pilot, flew MiG-21s, had 2 kills of his own. But one day in April, he came back from a mission looking like he'd seen something that didn't make sense in his understanding of how the world worked. "Hawk," he said, using Marcus's call sign, "something hunted us yesterday." Marcus had been reviewing a mission brief planning for the next day's patrol. He looked up. Hunted you. We were 70 miles from Iranian airspace, routine patrol. Suddenly, radar warning receiver starts screaming. Tone like nothing I've ever heard. Formation scattered. 2 aircraft didn't return. We never saw the enemy. Never got a radar contact. Nothing, just that tone, and then they were gone. Marcus frowned. Surface-to-air missiles. No, air-to-air. Intel confirmed it. But from what range? 80 miles 90. How is that possible? A week later, Captain Mustafa came back from a reconnaissance mission with a similar story. He flew a MiG-25 Foxbats, the fastest aircraft in Iraq's inventory, capable of Mach 2.5 at altitude. Untouchable, supposedly. I was at 65,000 feet, Mustafa said, still breathing hard from the stress of the flight. Mach 2.5, the fastest aircraft in the world. Something locked me. I saw the warning. Dove to the deck, used my speed to escape. But I felt it the whole time, like something was tracking me, watching me, waiting. Then in May, a strike package of 4 MiG-23s aborted their mission 80 miles from their target. The leader reported radar warning receiver indications of being tracked from over 100 miles away. Their own radar saw nothing. But the tone was clear, insistent, undeniable. Something out there beyond their ability to see or fight had them locked. They jettisoned their bombs and ran. Marcus listened to these stories with growing unease. Part of him wanted to dismiss them. Pilots get scared. They exaggerate. Combat stress makes people see threats that aren't there. But these were good pilots, experienced men. They weren't prone to panic. And then Colonel Hassan Bakr called a meeting of all squadron commanders. Marcus sat in the briefing room on a hot afternoon in late May, the air conditioning struggling against the Iraqi heat, surrounded by 24 of the best pilots in the Iraqi Air Force. Colonel Bakr stood at the front, his face grave in a way that made Marcus's stomach tighten. Gentlemen, Bakr said without preamble, we have a problem. He turned on the projector. On the screen appeared a photograph of an aircraft. Large twin-tailed, distinctive variable geometry wings that could sweep forward for low-speed handling or back for high-speed flight. Even in the grainy photograph, it looked dangerous, purposeful, built for one thing and one thing only. The F-14 Tomcat, Bakr said. American-built, sold to Iran during the Shah's regime. We believed most were grounded after the revolution. We were wrong. He clicked to the next slide. Numbers, statistics, range figures that made Marcus's blood run cold. The F-14 is equipped with the AWG-9 radar system. Detection range against fighter-sized targets is 115 nautical miles. For comparison, your MiG-23 Sapphire radar has a maximum range of 50 miles in perfect conditions and usually achieves much less than that in actual combat. Another click. A photograph of a missile. Large, sleek, deadly looking. The AIM-54 Phoenix missile. Maximum range exceeds 100 nautical miles. Speed greater than Mach 4. When launched at high altitude against a target at medium altitude, time to impact from maximum range is approximately 90 seconds. The missile uses a combination of inertial guidance data link updates from the launching aircraft and terminal active radar homing. This means that even if you defeat the launching aircraft, the missile can still complete its intercept autonomously. The room was absolutely silent. Marcus could hear his own breathing, could feel his heart beating in his chest. New tactical doctrine effective immediately, Baker continued. If you detect F-14 radar emissions, you disengage. You do not attempt to fight. You do not attempt to press your attack. You get low, you get fast, and you get out of the threat zone. This is not cowardice. This is survival. Someone raised their hand, Captain Rashid, an experienced F-4 pilot. Sir, what if we're on a critical mission? What if we need to hit the target? Bakr looked at him for a long moment. Then you accept that you might not come home. And you do everything possible to minimize your radar cross-section, to mask yourself in ground clutter, to avoid climbing to altitude where they can see you clearly. But understand this. 8 Iraqi aircraft have been confirmed lost to F-14 Tomcats in the last month. None of those pilots ever saw their attacker. None ever got close enough to fire back. This is not the kind of air combat you trained for. This is not a fair fight. He clicked to another slide. A simple comparison chart. a WG-9 radar 115 miles, Sapphire radar 50 miles, R-23 missile 35 miles, Phoenix missile 100 plus miles. They can see us from more than twice the distance we can see them. They can shoot us before we can shoot them, and their missile is 3 times faster than ours. Gentlemen, this is a capability gap so vast that all your skill, all your training, all your courage means nothing. The machine wins, every time. Marcus sat there staring at the numbers, feeling something he hadn't felt since he was a child. Helplessness. The absolute certainty that no matter how good he was, no matter how hard he trained, no matter how brave he proved himself, there were enemies in the sky who could kill him from distances he couldn't even imagine reaching. Enemies he would never see, never fight, never have a chance against. How do we fight them? He heard himself asking. Baker looked at him, and in the colonel's eyes, Marcus saw something that scared him more than the numbers on the screen. Resignation. We don't, Major Rahman. We avoid them. We run from them. We pray they're not where we need to be. And we accept that portions of Iranian airspace are now denied to us because the risk is too great. That's how we fight them, by not fighting them at all. The briefing ended. The pilots filed out slowly, talking in low voices. The confidence that had sustained them for the first months of the war, draining away like water from a cracked vessel. Marcus walked to his quarters alone, his mind spinning, trying to reconcile what he had just learned with everything he believed about himself, about his training, about his chances of surviving this war. That night, he lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of aircraft taking off and landing. Somewhere out there beyond the border, Iranian F-14 Tomcats were flying, waiting, watching with their impossible radars, ready to kill from distances that seemed like something from science fiction. And Marcus understood, with the kind of clarity that comes in the dark hours before dawn, that this war was going to be very different from anything he had imagined. Soviet training had prepared him for dogfights, for close-range combat, for battles where skill and courage could tip the balance. But what do you do when the enemy can see you from 100 miles away, when they can kill you before you even know they're there, when your radar warning receiver is the only indication you'll ever get that you're about to die? How do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you win a battle when the machine, not the man, determines the outcome? How do you maintain your courage when every flight could end with a missile you never saw coming, fired by a pilot you never detected from a distance? That seems like it should be science fiction. Marcus didn't know the answers, but he was about to learn them one mission at a time in the hardest school there is. The school where failure means death, where graduation means survival, and where the only diploma is making it home to write letters to your sons about honor and duty, while wondering if those words mean anything at all when the enemy has technology you can't match and tactics you can't counter. The war had just begun, and already Marcus Rahman was learning what it meant to be afraid. 6 months passed after that briefing, and Marcus Rahman learned what it meant to fly with fear as your constant companion. Not the sharp, clean fear of combat, the kind that focuses your mind and sharpens your reflexes. This was different. This was the slow, grinding fear of knowing that every time you climbed above 15,000 feet, every time your mission took you within striking distance of the Iranian border, you were entering a zone where death could reach out from distances your training had never prepared you for. The flying continued because it had to. War does not pause for fear. But everything changed. The confident, aggressive tactics Marcus had learned in the Soviet Union gave way to something more cautious, more defensive. Strike packages stayed low, hugging the terrain, using valleys and wadis to mask their radar signatures. Combat air patrols never ventured deep into contested airspace. And always, pilots kept one eye on their radar warning receivers, that small box of electronics that might be the only warning they would get before a Phoenix missile came screaming out of the sky at Mach 4. Marcus flew 27 missions in those 6 months. On 18 of them, he heard it. That distinctive beeping he had heard 18 times before, each time as terrifying as the first. X-band fire control radar illuminating his aircraft. Sometimes distant, sometimes close, but always terrifying in its implications. Each time he followed the new doctrine: brake hard, drop, altitude, dispense, chaff run. Get to the deck where ground clutter might mask his return. Get fast, get away, survive. He was not alone in this experience. The Iraqi Air Force was learning as organizations learn through pain and blood. They tried different tactics, sending aircraft in at wave tops, hoping to stay below the F-14's radar coverage. That worked sometimes until it didn't, until someone climbed a little too high, or the F-14s adjusted their patrol altitudes. They tried saturation tactics, sending large formations that would theoretically overwhelm the defensive capabilities. After all, an F-14 only carried 6 Phoenix missiles. If you sent 20 aircraft, simple mathematics suggested that most would get through. The problem with that theory was simple and brutal. Who would be the 6th that died, and could you ask pilots to fly missions where survival was literally a lottery, where living or dying depended on whether the F-14 crew chose to target you or the man flying 3 miles to your left? Marcus watched friends disappear. Lieutenant Kareem, the MiG-21 pilot, who had first told him about the hunting, went down in July. One moment he was there on the radio, the next moment nothing. Just silence in a smoking hole in the desert somewhere near Desful. Captain Mustafa, the MiG-25 pilot, who thought speed would save him, learned that even Mach 2.5 wasn't fast enough when a Phoenix launched from the right geometry. He ejected successfully, but spent the next year as a prisoner of war. Ahmed Hassan, Tariq Farouk. Names that became memories. Friends who had shared meals and told jokes and complained about the food and dreamed about the war ending, gone into the vast machinery of death that consumed pilots on both sides with equal appetite. By November 1982, Marcus had flown in combat for over 2 years. He was 32 years old. His hair was starting to show gray at the temples. His sons were growing up without him seeing their father in brief windows between deployments. News from home became his lifeline. Omar was now 12, excelling in mathematics, dreaming of becoming an engineer. Ali 9 had discovered books and read everything he could find. Normal life continuing despite the war. Things that reminded him there was a world beyond cockpits and missiles and the constant calculation of survival odds. The mission briefing came on the evening of November 18th. Marcus sat in the ready room at Al Taqadum Air Base, the western desert, stretching away in all directions, flat and brown and unforgiving. The base had grown since the war began, more aircraft, more personnel, the organized chaos of a military installation fully committed to sustained operations. But there was a weariness to it now, a sense that this war was not going to end quickly or cleanly. Colonel Backer stood at the front of the room, a map of the Persian Gulf displayed behind him. Red circles marked known Iranian installations. Blue arrows showed the planned flight paths. It looked clean and simple on the map, the way military operations always do before reality intervenes. "Gentlemen," Baker began, and Marcus recognized that particular tone of voice, the one that said this was going to be dangerous. "We have a priority target, Iranian oil storage facilities at Karg Island. Intelligence indicates minimal air defense in the immediate area. This is our window." He clicked through photographs, large cylindrical tanks, pipelines loading docks. The infrastructure that fed Iran's ability to fund the war through oil exports. High value, well defended. The kind of target that required careful planning and significant risk. Strike package will consist of 4 MiG-23 BN fighter bombers carrying iron bombs. Escort will be 4 MiG-21B IS fighters for air defense suppression and combat air patrol. Major Rahman will lead the escort element. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Lead, which meant responsibility not just for his own survival, but for 3 other pilots. Which meant making decisions that might get men killed. Which meant living with those decisions afterward. Time on target is 0830 hours local time tomorrow. Route is low level to avoid detection, then pop up for weapons delivery. Egress will be high-speed westbound. Intelligence assessment is that Iranian F-14 activity has been minimal this week. Maintenance issues. Parts shortages. This is why we're going now. Marcus raised his hand. "Sir, what's our response if we encounter F-14s en route?" Baker looked at him steadily. "Standard doctrine. Abort mission defensive maneuvers, aggress at maximum speed. The bombers will jettison their ordnance. Mission preservation is secondary to force preservation. We need pilots more than we need burning oil tanks." It was a brutally honest assessment, the kind that wouldn't have been spoken in the early days of the war. But this was month 26. They had learned. The briefing continued. weather frequencies, emergency procedures, search and rescue protocols. Marcus copied it all down in his flight notebook, the familiar ritual of preparation. Around him, 7 other pilots did the same. Young men, most of them. The MiG-21 pilots were all under 25, fresh from training, flying because someone had to, and the older pilots were dead or broken or grounded. They looked to Marcus with the kind of trust that made him want to scream. What could he teach them? How to run, how to be afraid, how to live with the knowledge that skill meant nothing when the enemy had better machines. After the briefing, the pilots gathered in the mess hall. The food was the usual. Rice lamb stew, flatbread. Not good, not terrible, just fuel. They ate mostly in silence, each man alone, with his thoughts, despite the company. This was the part Marcus hated most, these hours before a dangerous mission, when there was nothing to do but wait and think and imagine all the ways it could go wrong. He found a quiet corner and wrote a letter to Layla. They had been married for 12 years now, and he had written her hundreds of letters. But lately they all said variations of the same thing. I love you. I miss the boys. I'm doing my duty. Please tell them their father is proud of them. If something happens, know that you were the best part of my life. He never said he was scared. That wasn't in the vocabulary of letters from warriors to their families. But he wondered if she could read between the lines, if she understood that every letter was also a potential goodbye. Sleep came hard that night, and when it came, it brought dreams. Flying through clouds that turned into walls. Chasing targets that dissolved when he reached them. Missiles that curved impossibly through the air, following no matter which way he turned. He woke at 3 in the morning, his flight suit soaked with sweat, and lay there staring at the ceiling until the alarm went off at 4:30. The pre-flight ritual was familiar enough to be almost meditative. Walk-around inspection of the aircraft, checking control surfaces, looking for leaks or damage or anything that seemed wrong. Signing the maintenance forms. Strapping into the ejection seat, feeling the harness dig into his shoulders the way it always did. The smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid and the particular metallic scent of a fighter cockpit. Starting the engines, feeling the twin Tumansky turbojets rumble to life beneath him, with 25,000 pounds of thrust each. Enough power to push this machine through Mach 2 if you needed it. Enough power to make a man feel for a moment like he controlled something in this chaotic universe. Radio check. Scorpion flight check in. 2, 3, 4. His escort element all present. Good. On the other side of the ramp, the 4 MiG-23 BN bombers were starting up heavier and laden with ordnance. 80 aircraft total. A significant commitment of resources. The kind of mission that would get attention if it succeeded and questions if it failed. They taxied in formation, the ground crew marshaling them with practiced efficiency. Marcus looked left and right, saw his wingman tucked in close, and felt the familiar mix of pride and responsibility that came with leading men into combat. These pilots trusted him to make good decisions, to know when to fight and when to run to bring them home if it was possible. It was the kind of trust that could crush you if you let yourself think about it too much. The tower cleared them for takeoff. Marcus advanced the throttles to military power, felt the aircraft surge forward, then pushed them into afterburner. The kick of acceleration pressed him back into the seat as the runway markings blurred past and the ground fell away. Gear up. Flaps up. Climbing through 500 feet, 1,000, 5,000, leveling at 30,000 feet for the cruise out to their descent point. Below them, the Iraqi desert stretched away to the horizon, brown and lifeless, and marked with the scars of war. Bomb craters, wrecked vehicles. The occasional small town looking like it was trying to pretend the war wasn't happening. The morning sun was just breaking the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful in the way that only dangerous things can be beautiful. Scorpion flight, come left to heading 135, came the controller's voice from the ground. Descend and maintain 500 feet. Strike package, you are cleared to proceed to objective. Good hunting. Good hunting, as if this were sport. As if men's lives were not hanging in the balance with every mile they flew closer to Iranian airspace. Marcus pushed the stick forward, felt the MiG-23 nose drop, watched the altimeter unwind as they descended toward the deck. At 500 feet, they leveled off, now flying fast and low, using the terrain to mask their approach. The bombers were ahead and slightly below, hugging the earth even closer. The sun was climbing now, the temperature with it. By noon, the desert would be over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. But up here, even at low altitude, the air was cool and clean, streaming past the canopy at 350 knots. 60 miles from the coast. 50 miles. The tension in Marcus's body increased with every mile, his eyes scanning instruments and sky with practiced efficiency. Radar warning receiver silent. Fuel good. Engines normal. Weapon systems armed and ready. Everything as it should be. 40 miles. 30. The Persian Gulf was visible now, a line of blue against the brown of the land. Karg Island somewhere ahead, invisible in the haze, but there on his navigation display. The bombers were preparing for their pop-up maneuver, climbing to altitude to acquire their targets and release their weapons. Marcus's formation climbed with them. Up through 5,000 feet, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. His radar was still in standby, not actively transmitting yet. No point in announcing their presence until they had to. The bomber lead was making his weapons run call when Marcus noticed his radar warning receiver starting to show activity. Not active yet, just preliminary indications. Radar energy in the X-band. Could be anything. Could be nothing. Could be someone just searching, not yet locked. 22,000 feet. The bombers were calling 30 seconds to release. Marcus scanned his threat display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Signal strength was building. Direction was uncertain. Range was impossible to determine from passive detection alone. Scorpion laid bomber lead approaching initial point. Copy, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. Something wasn't right. That feeling you get when you've flown combat long enough to develop instincts, when your subconscious processes information faster than your conscious mind can articulate. Then his radar warning receiver went from passive detection to active alarm. That distinctive beeping, sharp, insistent, terrifying in its implications. X-band fire control radar. Multiple sources, tracking lock, strong signal strength. Marcus's eyes snapped to his radar scope. Empty. Nothing. No contacts. But the warning didn't lie. Someone was hunting him. Someone was tracking his aircraft, feeding targeting data, preparing to engage. And the signal strength analysis, that little readout that tried to estimate range based on the power of the incoming radar energy, was showing numbers that made his heart stop. Range estimate, 80 to 100 miles. For a moment, Marcus couldn't process it. Couldn't reconcile what his instruments were telling him with what his training said was possible. 100 miles, nothing locked targets from 100 miles. That was beyond the range of his own radar by double. That was science fiction range. Except it wasn't science fiction. Because he had been briefed. Because he knew what could do this. Because somewhere up there at an altitude he couldn't see, probably 35 or 40,000 feet, an Iranian F-14 Tomcat had him in its AWG-9 radar crosshairs. Had locked him. Had probably already fired. The math was simple and brutal. Phoenix missile Mach 490 seconds from launch to impact at maximum range. He had been locked for maybe 5 seconds, which meant he had at most 85 seconds to live. Doctrine was clear run. Break. Break Tomcats, all aircraft defensive now. His hands slammed the stick forward and right simultaneously, MiG-23 snapping into a violent roll and dive nose dropping toward the earth far below. G-forces crushed him into a seat as he pulled 6 Gs, 7 vision narrowing at the edges, the gray curtain of unconsciousness threatening. Chaff dispensing automatically, clouds of aluminum strips blooming behind the aircraft to confuse radar-guided missiles. Flares popping burning magnesium to decoy heat seekers. The altimeter was unwinding like a broken clock. 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000, 8,000. Marcus pulled out at 500 feet, the ground a blur beneath him, flying now at maximum speed, heading west, back toward Iraq mission, aborted survival, the only priority. He looked back over his shoulder. The neat 8-ship formation was gone, scattered like leaves in a storm. Aircraft diving in all directions, everyone following the same doctrine: get low, get fast, get out. The MiG-23BN bombers were jettisoning their ordnance bombs, falling harmlessly into empty desert. Thousands of dollars of explosives wasted because staying alive mattered more than hitting targets. The relentless beeping was still screaming, still showing lock, still showing that somewhere up there, an enemy he could not see was tracking him with technology he could not match. And then 5 miles behind him, he saw it. The thing every pilot dreads. The fireball that means someone didn't make it. Orange and black rolling upward into the morning sky, debris falling in a spreading pattern. An aircraft transformed in an instant from a machine carrying a human being into scattered wreckage, spreading across square miles of desert. Scorpion 3 status, Marcus called, his voice tight. Silence. Scorpion 4 come in 3. Nothing. The radio erupted with voices. Panicked. Confused. Someone saying they saw missile impacts. Someone else calling out threats that no longer mattered. The controller on the ground demanding situation reports. And underneath it all, the steady warning of the radar receiver still showing, lock, still tracking, still hunting. Marcus flew west for 20 minutes, staying at 500 feet, maxing out his speed, burning fuel at an unsustainable rate, but not caring because fuel didn't matter if you were dead. Gradually, the tone began to fade. The signal strength dropped. The lock indication disappeared. Whoever had been hunting him had either lost interest or lost track or reached the limits of their own patrol area. He climbed back to altitude once he was safely over Iraqi airspace, joined up with what was left of his formation. 6 aircraft out of 8, 2 missing, 2 pilots gone, and they had never even reached their target, never dropped a single bomb, never accomplished anything except dying or surviving, which in this war was starting to seem like the only accomplishment that mattered. The landing at Al-Taqadum was quiet, no celebrations, no mission success, just the hollow relief of being alive when others weren't. Marcus shut down his engines and sat in the cockpit for a long time, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off of staring at instruments that no longer meant anything. The ground crew climbed up. "Sir, you okay?" Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. He climbed down, legs unsteady, and walked across the ramp to the operations building. Behind him, his MiG-23 sat silent, scorched marks on the tail from the flare dispenser, a machine that had kept him alive through sheer speed and the desperate measures of a pilot who knew he was being hunted by something he could never hope to fight. The debriefing was clinical. Colonel Backer asked questions, Marcus answered them. 8 aircraft launched, 6 returned. 2 pilots confirmed killed in action, Lieutenant Hassan and Captain Farouk. 0 bombs delivered. 0 damage to target. Mission failure. Cause F-14 Tomcat engagement at extended range. "Did you see them?" Backer asked. "No, sir." "Did you get a radar contact?" "No, sir. My radar never detected anything." "But they saw you." "Yes, sir. From the moment we climbed through 20,000 feet, they were tracking us. Waiting, like eagles watching mice." Baker nodded slowly, his face showing the weight of command decisions that got men killed. "This is war now, Major Rahman. Not dogfights, not individual skill. This is technology war. And we're fighting with yesterday's tools against tomorrow's weapons. We're outmatched. Completely." Marcus said nothing. What was there to say? The numbers didn't lie. The capability gap was real. And somewhere over Iran, F-14 pilots were probably debriefing their own mission, marking 2 more kills, going home to their families, doing their duty, just as Marcus tried to do his. That night, Marcus sat in his quarters and tried to write letters. One to Hassan's wife, one to Farouk's family. "What do you say? Your husband died bravely. He died without fighting. Your son died defending his country. He died running away, hunted by a machine that killed him from a distance where he couldn't even see his enemy. In the end, he wrote simple words. He died doing his duty. He died it as a warrior. And I am sorry I could not save him." The words felt hollow even as he wrote them. But what else was there? The truth that they were all just waiting for their turn. That every mission was Russian roulette with missiles instead of bullets. That the only difference between the living and the dead was luck and timing. And whether the F-14 crew chose to target you or someone else. Marcus lay awake that night, staring at darkness, listening to the sound of his own breathing, and understood something fundamental. This war was going to break him. Maybe not kill him, though that remained a possibility. But break him certainly. Break his confidence, his certainty, his belief that skill and courage mattered. Because he had learned in the most visceral way possible that when one side has technology that can kill from 100 miles and the other side can barely see 50 miles, skill becomes irrelevant. Courage becomes just another word for accepting death. And somewhere deep inside, a question was forming. A question that would take years to answer, but was already present in embryonic form. If the machine matters more than if technology determines outcomes more than training or spirit or will, then what does it mean to be a warrior? What does it mean to have honor? And what happens when you realize that everything you were taught about warfare, about yourself, about what makes victory possible is wrong? The answers would come, but they would come through pain and captivity and a long journey that would eventually bring him to a porch in Texas, teaching his grandson about the day he learned that American power wasn't just about machines, but about the values that guided how those machines were used, about the difference between killing efficiently and fighting honorably, about the lesson that the F-14 Tomcat taught not through its weapons, but through the mercy of the men who flew it. But that was still years away. For now, Marcus Roman was just a scared pilot who had survived another day, who would fly again tomorrow, because that was his duty, and who was slowly learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you cannot win and keep flying anyway. The months after Karg Island blurred together in a way that combat experiences often do when survival becomes routine and terror becomes ordinary. Marcus flew 32 more missions between December 1982 and March 1984. He learned to live with fear the way people learn to live with chronic pain, something always present, always there in the background, manageable only because it had to be managed. The Iraqi Air Force adapted as organizations do when faced with existential threats. They changed their tactics, completely abandoning the aggressive Soviet doctrine that had guided their training. No more deep strike missions into Iranian airspace. No more combat air patrols over contested territory. No more attempts to achieve air superiority. Instead, they flew defensively, protecting Iraqi airspace, hugging their own borders, accepting that large portions of the sky now belonged to Iran because contesting them meant death. When they did venture out, missions were planned with meticulous attention to the F-14 threat. Stay low always. Use terrain masking. Never climb above 10,000 feet unless absolutely necessary. Keep missions short. Have escape routes planned before you even take off. And always, always watch the radar warning receiver like your life depends on it, because it does. Young pilots arrived at the squadron with fresh faces and Soviet training manuals and confidence that lasted until their first encounter with that tone. Marcus watched them age years in minutes. Watched the certainty drain from their eyes when they realized that everything they had been taught about air combat superiority meant nothing against an enemy who could kill from distances they couldn't even conceptualize. Some of them handled it. Some of them developed problems. Panic attacks before missions. Freezing on the controls when the warning receiver activated. One lieutenant ejected from a perfectly functional MiG-23 because he thought he heard the tone, except it was a false alarm, his own fear conjuring threats that didn't exist. The squadron doctor called it combat stress. Marcus called it the rational response to an irrational situation. How do you stay calm when you're flying into an environment where invisible enemies can kill you at will? How do you maintain aggressive warrior spirit when the doctrine requires you to run? The moment you detect a threat, the contradiction was slowly breaking the Iraqi Air Force's fighting spirit, one pilot at a time, one mission at a time. Marcus himself became something of a legend in the squadron. The F-14 survivor. The man who had been locked by Tomcats 18 times 1920 and kept coming back. Other pilots would ask him how he did it, how he kept his nerve, how he kept flying into that sky, knowing what was waiting there. The truth which he never told them was that he didn't know. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride, the refusal to let a machine defeat him psychologically, even if it defeated him tactically. Maybe it was just the slow accumulation of scar tissue on his soul, the way you stop feeling pain after being hurt enough times. But inside, where no one else could see, Marcus was terrified. Every single flight, every single time he strapped into that cockpit, the terror never went away. He just got better at hiding it. By mid-1983, Iraq tried a new approach: overwhelming force. If an F-14 could only carry 6 Phoenix missiles, then send 20 aircraft. Simple mathematics suggested that most would survive. The problem with that theory revealed itself immediately. Who would be the 6 that died? Because make no mistake, 6 would die. The F-14 crews were good, their weapons were reliable, and they knew how to exploit their advantage. So each mission became a lottery where living or dying depended on whether you were targeted or someone else was, whether the missile tracked true or lost lock, whether you zigged when you should have zagged. Marcus flew 3 of these mass raids, survived all 3, watched friends die in all 3. By the end, he had lost count of how many people he knew who were gone. Lieutenant Kareem, Captain Ahmed, Major Rashid, Hassan, Farouk, names that became memories, faces that appeared in his dreams. Men who had shared meals with him, told jokes, complained about the food, showed him pictures of their families. Gone. Scattered across the desert in pieces too small to recover, or captured, or simply missing with no confirmation either way. The psychological weight of it was crushing. Marcus started having nightmares. Not about dying, interestingly, about surviving, about landing after missions and counting aircraft and realizing that once again someone else had died instead of him. About the arbitrary nature of it. About the fact that his survival had nothing to do with his skill and everything to do with random chance. That was the worst part. Not the fear of death, but the meaninglessness of survival. Then came May 1984, and everything changed. The mission brief seemed routine, or as routine as any combat mission could be after 3 years of war. Iranian strike package reported heading toward Abadan refinery. 8 Iraqi aircraft scrambled to intercept Marcus, leading 4 MiG-23s with 4 MiG-21s in support. Intelligence reported minimal F-14 activity. Parts shortages were getting worse for Iran. The embargo was biting. This should be manageable. Marcus took off at 09:15 hours local time. Clear sky, good visibility, temperature, already climbing toward the hundreds. The kind of day that would be perfect for flying if people weren't trying to kill you. His wingmen tucked in tight young pilots who trusted him to make the right calls to keep them alive. That trust weighed on him like physical pressure. They climbed to 20,000 feet, radar active, searching for the Iranian aircraft. Ground control vectored them southeast toward the reported contacts. Marcus's radar picked up multiple targets at 40 miles. He designated the lead aircraft prepared to employ his R-23 missiles. His wingmen were ready, everything by the book. The Iranian aircraft detected them at the same moment. The formation began to turn away defensive. Marcus called for his flight to pursue, closing the range. 35 miles, 30 miles. He was preparing to fire when his radar warning receiver gave him the tone he had learned to dread. X-band, fire control, strong signal, F-14. His eyes snapped to his radar scope. Nothing. No contacts beyond the Iranian aircraft they were already chasing. But the warning didn't lie. Somewhere an F-14 had him locked. Marcus's mouth went dry. Doctrine was clear. Disengage immediately. But they were so close. The Iranian aircraft were right there. If he could just get one shot, just one kill, just prove that Iraqi pilots could still fight effectively despite the technology gap. Pride, that's what it was. Stupid, dangerous pride. The need to prove something to himself, if no one else. He held course. Prepared his missile. It's now 28 miles, perfect envelope for the R-23. Scorpion 1 Fox 1. He called the shot, pressed the trigger. The R-23 leapt from the rail, white smoke trail arcing ahead. A second past 2-3. The missile was tracking guidance correct, heading straight for the lead Iranian F-4 Phantom. Then the F-4 deployed chaff broke hard left, and the missile lost lock. It flew through empty air and self-destructed at the end of its flight time. Miss, Marcus cursed, prepared to fire another. But now the range was wrong, the geometry bad, and the radar warning receiver that was getting louder, more insistent. The F-14 lock was solid now. Wherever it was, it had him perfectly tracked. Then he saw it. 15 miles away, 5,000 feet above him, there against the blue sky like a shark in deep water. The distinctive silhouette of an F-14 Tomcat. Twin tails, swing wings. Even at this distance, it looked dangerous, purposeful, exactly what it was designed to be. The F-14 was engaged with his lead element, maneuvering defensive for the moment. Distracted. This was his shot, maybe his only shot. The chance he had been waiting for through 3 years of running, 3 years of fear, 3 years of feeling helpless. Here it was, an F-14 vulnerable within his missile envelope. Marcus pulled his nose up, selected another R-23, locked the F-14 with his Sapphire radar. Good tone, strong return, range 18 miles at the edge of his missile's capability, but possible. His finger moved to the trigger. Scorpion 3, engaging bandit high, he called. He pressed the trigger. The missile launched, arcing upward on a column of white smoke. Beautiful. Perfect. Everything he had trained for condensed into this single moment. The F-14 pilot saw it coming, broke hard to dispense chaff. The missile tracked the chaff cloud instead of the aircraft. Another miss. But Marcus was committed now. He pushed his throttles to afterburner, closing the distance. 8 miles. 7. 6. Now he was in range for his R-60 aphid heat-seeking missiles. Inferior weapons compared to what the Americans had, but they worked at close range, and that's what he had now, 5 miles. He selected R-60, heard the seeker head growl as it picked up the F-14's engine heat. Good tone, solid lock. 4 miles. Perfect position. The F-14 was defensive maneuvering, hard losing energy. Marcus was gaining. For the first time in 3 years, he had an advantage. 3 miles, he was going to do it. He was going to shoot down an F-14. He was going to prove that Iraqi pilots, that he personally could beat the machine that had haunted them, hunted them, killed them with impunity. Then his radar warning receiver changed tone. Different frequency, different threat. Behind him. He looked over his shoulder through the canopy and saw it. Another F-14, the first one's wingman aircraft he hadn't even known was there. And it was firing. The contrail of an AIM-7 Sparrow was already visible coming from his 4 o'clock position, radar-guided terminal phase seconds from impact. Marcus broke hard left, but he knew instantly it was too late. The missile had too much energy, too much closure rate. His maneuvers were futile. The Sparrow tracked through his turn and detonated its proximity fuse 15 feet from his right engine. The explosion was catastrophic. Shrapnel ripped through the engine bay, turbine blades, disintegrated fuel lines ruptured. The entire right side of his aircraft became a mass of fire and failing systems. Red lights everywhere. Master caution screaming. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Control stick going soft in his hand. The MiG-23 began to roll right, nose dropping. Marcus fought the controls, but the aircraft wasn't responding. Altitude 12,000 feet and decreasing. Airspeed dropping. The aircraft was dying, taking him with it, unless he did something right now. Scorpion 3 is hit ejecting. His hand found the ejection handle between his legs. He pulled hard. The world exploded. Canopy jettisoned with a bang that felt like a bomb going off next to his head. The ejection seat fired rocket motor igniting beneath him, shooting him up and away from the dying aircraft with force that compressed his spine and made his vision white out. Then he was tumbling sky and ground switching places, the roar of wind, the smell of cordite from the seat motor. The main parachute deployed automatically. Violent jerk straps cutting into his shoulders and thighs, sudden deceleration that made his neck snap back. Then relative quiet, just wind and his own breathing harsh and fast inside his helmet. Marcus looked down. Iranian territory. He could see the landscape spreading below him, brown desert marked with the occasional road or small town. Maybe 10 miles inside the border. Maybe more. He was going to be captured. He looked up, falling at maybe 1,500 feet per minute. He had time, maybe 5 minutes before he hit the ground. And circling above him, clearly visible against the blue sky, was the F-14 that he had tried to shoot down. The pilot had broken off from his engagement, come around, and was now circling Marcus as he descended, watching him. The ultimate position of power. A fighter aircraft versus a man hanging helplessly under a parachute. Marcus had seen what happened to pilots who ejected over enemy territory. Sometimes they were strafed in their chutes. Sometimes they were captured and tortured. Sometimes they just disappeared. His heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline and fear mixing into something that made his whole body tremble, despite the ejection seat training that was supposed to prepare you for this moment. The F-14 made another circle, close enough that Marcus could see details. The cockpit, 2 figures pilot and radar intercept officer. The weapon stations under the wings. The elegant, deadly lines of an aircraft that had just shot him down. For 30 seconds, the F-14 circled. Marcus hung there helpless, waiting for the cannon fire that would end it, waiting for the decision of the men in that cockpit about whether he would live or die. Then the F-14 rocked its wings once, a pilot gesture that meant, "I see you." Recognition, acknowledgement, and it flew away. Back toward Iran, back to its base, leaving Marcus alive in his parachute, descending toward captivity, but alive. Marcus watched it go, not understanding. He had tried to kill that pilot, had locked him, fired missiles at him, done everything in his power to bring him down, and the pilot had spared him. Why? This wasn't how war worked. This wasn't what Soviet doctrine taught. The enemy was the enemy. You destroyed them completely. No mercy, no hesitation. But the F-14 was gone now, just a speck against the horizon, and Marcus was still alive. He hit the ground hard 2 minutes later, his ankle twisting painfully on landing. The parachute dragged him 20 feet before he managed to hit the releases. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, trying to process what had just happened. Then he heard vehicles. Iranian Revolutionary Guard, probably, coming for him. He destroyed his radio, burned his maps, prepared to be captured. This was it. The moment he had feared for 3 years. Prisoner of war. At the mercy of people he had been bombing for 38 months. 15 minutes later, Iranian soldiers found him. 6 men, AK-47s pointed at his head. Marcus raised his hands slowly, making no sudden movements. "I surrender," he said in Farsi, which he spoke adequately. "I am Iraqi Air Force pilot. I surrender." They bound his hands with rough cord, blindfolded him, loaded him into a truck. As the vehicle pulled away, Marcus's mind was racing. Not with fear, though that was present, but with confusion. With one question that wouldn't leave him alone. Why did the F-14 pilot spare me? The ride lasted maybe 2 hours, bumping over rough roads, the heat inside the covered truck bed climbing to unbearable levels. When they finally stopped and removed his blindfold, Marcus found himself at a small military installation, concrete buildings surrounding a dusty courtyard. They took him to a cell, concrete floor, one barred window, a bucket in the corner. Prison. An interrogator came that evening. Middle-aged man spoke decent Arabic, professional demeanor. He asked for Marcus's name, rank, serial number. Marcus gave them. The interrogator asked about his squadron, their aircraft, their tactics. Marcus said nothing, as was his right under Geneva Convention. The interrogator seemed unsurprised. "You will be here for some time, Major Rahman. It would be easier if you cooperated." Marcus said nothing. The interrogator left. Guards brought water-bread yogurt. The food surprised him. He had expected to be starved, beaten, broken. But this was adequate food. Not great, but not starvation rations either. He ate slowly, his mind still processing the events of the day. That night, lying on the concrete floor, staring at the ceiling, Marcus thought about the moment in the sky, the F-14 circling, the choice to spare him. And for the first time in 3 years, he wondered if maybe possibly there was something about this enemy that he didn't understand, something that didn't fit the narrative he had been taught, that Americans were soft, that American-trained pilots fought without honor, that the only thing that mattered in war was victory, however achieved. But the pilot who shot him down had shown mercy, had acknowledged him as a fellow warrior, as a human being, even in the moment of his defeat. That wasn't what Marcus expected. That wasn't how enemies were supposed to behave. 3 weeks later, they transferred him to a larger facility near Shiraz. Better conditions, more organized. Iranian Air Force ran this prison, not Revolutionary Guards, and the difference was immediately apparent. Guards were professional. Food improved. They were even allowed some recreation time in a courtyard where Marcus met other Iraqi pilots. Captain Rashid was there, an F-4 pilot shot down in March. Lieutenant Tariq MiG-21 shot down in April, both by F-14s, both with the same story. Locked from impossible ranges, never saw it coming, just the tone and then missiles and then ejection and capture. They formed a small community, these captured pilots. Played cards with a deck Rashid had somehow acquired, told stories, argued about politics and religion and whether their national soccer team was any good. Waited for the war to end, waited to go home. One evening, sitting in the courtyard as the sun set over the Iranian mountains, Rashid asked Marcus a question. "Who trains these Iranian F-14 pilots? They're too good, better than their F-4 pilots, better than their F-5 pilots. Someone taught them." Marcus had been thinking about that. Before the revolution, Americans trained them. U.S. Navy pilots came here to Iran 77 to 79, taught the Iranians how to fly the F-14, how to employ it tactically. Top Gun graduates, some of them. Tariq looked surprised. Americans teaching Iranians, but they're enemies now. They were allies then, Marcus said. The Shah bought F-14IS from America. Lots of them. and America sent instructors to train the pilots. Then the revolution happened. The Americans left, but the training stayed. Rashid leaned back against the wall. So we're fighting American-trained pilots, flying American aircraft using American tactics, just without Americans actually flying them. Marcus nodded slowly. In Soviet training, Soviet tactics, Soviet aircraft against American systems. He shook his head. Not even close. They sat in silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere in the distance, an F-14 took off from an Iranian base, the sound of its engines carrying across the valley. Marcus listened to it climb away and wondered if that was the aircraft that had shot him down. Wondered if the pilot ever thought about the Iraqi officer he had spared. Wondered what it meant that his enemy had chosen mercy over vengeance. The answer would come eventually, but it would take 3 more years of captivity and a conversation that would change everything Marcus understood about warfare, about honor, and about what it meant to be a warrior. Marcus returned to the present, his voice quiet now in the Texas evening. Tyler hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted, completely absorbed in the story. The stars were fully out now, brilliant against the black desert sky. That question stayed with me every day, Marcus continued. Why did he spare me? For 3 years, it was like a weight I carried. Every morning waking up in that cell, every meal, every conversation with Rashid and Tariq. I kept coming back to it. Why mercy? Why not finish the kill? He took a long breath, the cool air filling his lungs. Then in August 1987, everything became clear. Tyler leaned forward. What happened? I met him, the pilot, not the one who shot me down, but his squadron mate, a man who would teach me more about America in one conversation than I learned in all my years fighting against American machines. Marcus closed his eyes and the memory came flooding back. The summer of 1987 had been brutal. The war was in its 7th year, grinding on with no end in sight. The prison camp near Shiraz had settled into a grim routine. 23 Iraqi pilots all shot down by F-14s, except for one unlucky soul who fell to an F-5. They lived in a kind of limbo, neither free nor truly imprisoned, just existing in the space between. Then one morning in August, a guard came to Marcus's cell. Rahman, someone wants to talk to you. Marcus was led across the compound to a small office he had never been in before. Inside sat an Iranian Air Force officer, maybe 40 years old, captain's rank insignia on his flight suit. But what caught Marcus's attention immediately was the patch on his shoulder. F-14 Tomcat Squadron, TFB-8 Isfahan. The officer gestured to a chair. Sit, please. I am Captain Reza Massoud. I flew F-14s. Past tense. I was shot down 3 months ago. SA-6 missile, your Iraqi air defense. I was fortunate. I ejected, was captured, then exchanged back last week through Red Cross mediation. Marcus sat slowly, not understanding. Why are you telling me this? Because I wanted to meet one of you, the pilots we fought. I wanted to see if you were monsters. Massoud smiled slightly. You're not, just men, like me. I don't understand. Let me ask you something, Major Rahman. When you ejected, when you were hanging in your parachute, helpless, an F-14 circled you, and then it left. Do you remember? Marcus's throat tightened. Yes. That might have been me, or one of my squadron mates. We had a policy, you see. If a pilot ejects, if he surrenders, we don't shoot. That's not war. That's murder. Soviet doctrine says destroy the enemy completely. American doctrine says destroy the enemy's ability to fight, but preserve his dignity as a human being. There's a difference, a biggest difference. Massoud walked to a small cabinet and pulled out 2 tea glasses and a thermos. He handed one to Marcus. The gesture was so ordinary, so civilized that Marcus almost couldn't process it. Enemy to enemy, warrior to warrior, but also human to human. I was trained by Americans, Massoud continued, 1977 to 1971. Naval Air Station, Miramar, California. Most beautiful place I've ever seen. The instructors, they were U.S. Navy pilots. Some of them, Top Gun graduates. They taught us more than just how to fly the F-14. They taught us a philosophy. What philosophy? That your enemy is not evil. He's a warrior like you. He has family like you. He fights for his country like you. Honor demands you remember that even when you're killing him. Marcus stared at the tea in his hands. But you did kill. 78 confirmed victories. I've heard the numbers. Yes, I shot down 6 Iraqi aircraft myself, and it haunts me, every single one, because those were men, pilots like you, skilled, brave, doing their duty. But my duty was to stop them, to protect my country. So I did, but I never forgot they were human. Masood sat back down, his eyes distant. One of my instructors at Miramar, Commander David Masterson, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, Captain, the machine gives you power. The AWG-9 can see 100 miles. The Phoenix can kill from that distance. You will have the ability to destroy your enemy before he even knows you're there. But you need to understand something. That power comes with responsibility. You're not one. You're a man with a powerful tool. The tool makes you dangerous. But it's the man who decides how to use that power, with wisdom, with honor, with mercy when possible. Marcus felt something shift inside him. This American instructor, he taught you mercy. He taught us that warfare has rules, not just legal rules, Geneva Convention rules, moral rules. You fight to win, yes. You use every advantage you have. But you remember that your enemy is human. And when the fight is over, when he's helpless, you don't kill unnecessarily. But why? Marcus's voice was almost pleading now. Why be merciful to someone trying to kill you? Masood looked at him steadily. Because that's what separates warriors from butchers. And because Major Rahman wars end. But the choices you make in war, those stay with you forever. I can live with shooting down 6 aircraft whose pilots were trying to kill me. I couldn't live with strafing helpless men in parachutes. That's the difference. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Masood stood. Come, I want to show you something. He led Marcus outside to a storage building at the edge of the compound. Inside were boxes of supplies. Masood opened one. Military jackets, American M65 field jackets in olive drab green, the kind U.S. soldiers wore. The Americans, even after the revolution, even after we became enemies, they left behind equipment, supplies. We found warehouses full of it. These jackets, they were made for American soldiers, to keep them warm, to protect them. He pulled one out, held it up. Look at the quality, the lining, the pockets, the care and construction. The Americans, they make equipment that cares about the person wearing it. Not just function, comfort, like the soldier's well-being matters. He handed it to Marcus. Winter's coming. You'll need this. Take it. Marcus held the jacket, feeling the weight of it, the quality. Soviet gear was rough, scratchy, minimum necessary. But this felt like someone had thought about the human being who would wear it, about keeping him not just alive, but comfortable. You see, Masood said, American power isn't just the F-14, not just the Phoenix missile. It's this. The values that say even your equipment should treat soldiers with dignity, that even in war, humans matter. Marcus looked up, his eyes stinging. But we're enemies. We were. Maybe we still are politically. But you're a prisoner of war now, under my military's care. An Iranian Air Force, we follow rules. The rules that Americans taught us. Geneva Convention. Proper treatment of prisoners. Because that's what civilized people do. Over the following weeks, Marcus wore that jacket. When November came and the nights got cold in the mountain facility, it kept him warm. And every time he put it on, he thought about what Masood had said, about American values, about the difference between power and wisdom, about warriors versus butchers. One evening, Rashid noticed the jacket. American, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Does it bother you wearing enemy equipment? Marcus thought about that. No, because I'm starting to understand something. The enemy wasn't Americans. The enemy was our own thinking. Our Soviet training that said, crush your enemy completely, show no mercy, win at any cost. That thinking, that's what got us killed. That's what made us lose. We didn't lose because of thinking, Rashid protested. We lost because they had better machines. But did we lose because their machines were used by men who understood something we didn't? That power without wisdom is just destruction. That victory without honor is meaningless. That killing efficiently doesn't make you a warrior. Making hard choices about when not to kill, that's what makes you a warrior. Marcus stood, walked to the fence that marked the boundary of the recreation yard, looked up at the stars. The pilot who shot me down could have killed me in my parachute. He chose not to, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to show mercy. That strength that comes from somewhere. It comes from values. American values about human dignity, about honor in warfare, about remembering your enemy is human. He turned back to Rashid. And those values, they saved my life, not just physically. They saved me from becoming something I couldn't live with. Because if I had won, if I had shot down that F-14, and then if I had the chance to kill the pilot in his chute, I would have taken it. Soviet doctrine, complete destruction. But then I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. The Americans, their training saved me from that. Marcus paused on the porch looking at Tyler. You understand what I'm telling you, the F-14 defeated me. The technology, yes, but more than that, the values behind the technology. Because American instructors taught Iranian pilots not just how to kill, but when not to kill. How to be warriors, not murderers. And that lesson, that saved my humanity. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. What happened after that? April 1987, prisoner exchange. Red Cross mediated. 23 of us Iraqi prisoners traded for 31 Iranian prisoners. The numbers tell you something about who was winning the air war. Marcus's voice took on a different quality now remembering. The day I left, Captain Massoud was there, supervising the exchange. We made eye contact. He nodded. I nodded back. No words needed. He'd given me something more valuable than freedom. He'd given me understanding. I went home to Iraq. They called us heroes, survivors of Iranian brutality. But that wasn't true. We'd been treated according to the Geneva Convention. We'd been treated with dignity because Iranian Air Force had learned from Americans that even prisoners of war deserve humanity. And then what? I tried to go back to flying, but I couldn't. Every time I strapped into a cockpit, I thought about the man in that F-14, about his choice, about what it meant. I developed back problems, chronic pain from the ejection, I told them. The doctors grounded me. They didn't know the truth. My back was fine. My conscience couldn't fly anymore. Marcus took a long drink from his now warm beer. September 1988, the war ended. Ceasefire. No winner. Just exhaustion. 8 years. Hundreds of thousands dead. Cities destroyed. Economies ruined. For what? Nothing changed. The borders stayed the same. All that death, all that suffering for nothing. Then in August 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait. I knew immediately what would happen. America would respond. An Iraqi Air Force against American Air Force. We had no chance. None. They tried to call me back to active duty. I refused. Said my injury was too severe. A colonel threatened me with court-martial for cowardice. I told him, court-martial me. I will not fly against Americans. I've seen what American training can do. I've seen what American machines can do, and I will not send young pilots to die for nothing. They didn't court-martial me. They needed me for planning, even if I wouldn't fly. So I watched. January 1991 Desert Storm. American F-15s F-16SF/A, 18S destroyed Iraqi Air Force in 3 days. 3 days. We'd fought Iranians with American-trained pilots for 8 years. Americans themselves, 3 days. Marcus's voice was hollow now. I trained 6 pilots personally, taught them everything I knew. All 6 dead in the first week, shot down by Americans flying aircraft that weren't even as advanced as the F-14 I'd faced. That's when I knew we never had a chance. Not against Iran's F-14s, not against America's air power. Soviet training, Soviet doctrine, Soviet machines completely outmatched. It wasn't even close. Tyler was silent, processing. After the war sanctions, Iraq collapsed. Saddam stayed in power, but the country was dying. I had 2 sons. Omar was 19, Ali 16. I didn't want them growing up there. Didn't want them conscripted into future wars. Didn't want them to die for Saddam's ambitions. So in 1995, I did something I never thought I'd do. I applied for refugee status to leave Iraq, to go to America. To America, Tyler's eyes widen. The country you fought against, the country that built the machine that defeated me, but also the country that taught the values that saved me. Yes, to America. Marcus smiled slightly. It took 2 years. Forms, interviews, bribes, waiting. But in November 1995, we got approval. Refugee resettlement, United States. The country I once tried to kill Americans from now taking us in. We arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. Everything was overwhelming. So much noise, so many people, so much abundance, but also something I didn't expect, kindness. Refugee resettlement program placed us in Midland, Texas. Small city, oil industry, big ski. Reminded me of Iraq, actually. They gave us apartment, furniture, $500 job counseling, English classes. First night in America, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, from disbelief. I'm in America. The enemy country, and they're helping me. Next morning, social worker visited. Nice lady Barbara. She said, Mr. Rahman, I see you were Iraqi Air Force pilot. We have veteran support programs. Would you like me to connect you with VA? I said, VA Veterans Affairs, but I fought against America. She said, doesn't matter. You're a veteran. You served your country. You deserve support. That's how we do things here. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. That's how we do things here. 4 words that explained everything. Everything I'd learned about American values confirmed in one sentence. I worked at gas station, minimum wage, pumping gas. I was 46 years old, former major, fighter pilot, 3 kills, now pumping gas, speaking broken English, trying to figure out American money. It was humbling. But you know what, I was happy because my sons were safe. Omar went to American high school, then university, became engineer just like he dreamed. Ali studied business. They had opportunities. They could become anything. That was worth any humiliation I felt. I took English classes at community college. The instructor was Sarah Johnson, divorced 50 years old former teacher, kind, patient. She helped me with pronunciation. Never made me feel stupid. We talked after class. She learned my story. Not all of it, not the killing, but enough. And she didn't judge, she just listened. Layla, my wife, she passed in 1996, cancer. I was alone with my sons in a foreign country, but Sarah, she helped. 2 years later, we married. She taught me more English, helped me study for citizenship test, supported me when I opened small auto repair shop. Year 2000, I took citizenship test, questions about Constitution, about American history, about rights and responsibilities. I studied hard. This mattered to me. Citizenship ceremony, March 2000, Midland Courthouse. 45 people becoming citizens from everywhere. Mexico, India, Vietnam, Somalia, Iraq, Nigeria, Philippines. Judge said something I'll never forget. America is not defined by where you were born, but by what you believe. If you believe in freedom, equality, opportunity, you are American. We recited oath. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance to Iraq, and that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America. Marcus's voice was firm. I meant every word, because America didn't just give me refuge. America gave me redemption, a chance to be more than my past, a chance to build something good. That's American promise, and it's real. Then came September 11, 2001. Towers fell, Pentagon hit, plane down in Pennsylvania, 19 hijackers. None from Iraq, but I knew people would look at me different. Next day, someone spray painted my shop, "Go Home Terrorist." I was afraid. Would they deport me? Attack me? But then something amazing happened. My neighbors showed up, Sarah's friends, people I barely knew. They brought paint, covered the graffiti. Big Texan cowboy named Bill. He said, Marcus, you're one of us now. Anyone got a problem with you, they got a problem with me. Another neighbor, Laura, brought food. Said, I'm so sorry this happened. This isn't what America is about. Marcus's eyes were wet now. And I believed her, because that's the America I know, not the America of fear and hate, but America of kindness and community, of people choosing to see the human, not the enemy. That's American values, not on TV, not in politics, but in everyday people choosing kindness. He turned to Tyler, his voice urgent now. You want to know if you should join the Air Force, if you should fly, if you should fight? Let me tell you what I learned in 50 years. Fighting is sometimes necessary. Evil exists. Tyranny exists. Sometimes good people must fight. But how you fight matters. Why you fight matters. What you become during fighting matters most. I fought for Saddam Hussein, for dictator, for wrong reasons, and it nearly destroyed my soul. You, if you fight, fight for right reasons, to protect innocent, to defend freedom, to preserve peace, not just win wars. And remember, your enemy is a person. Maybe wrong, maybe dangerous, but still a person. Never forget that, even when you have to kill. Especially when you have to kill. That's what American instructors taught Iranian pilots, who taught me. That's value worth fighting for. Tyler's voice was small. So you're saying I should join? I'm saying if you join, remember three things. Marcus held up one finger. One, the machine makes you powerful, but you decide how to use that power. With wisdom, with mercy, with honor. Second finger. Two, your enemy today might be your friend tomorrow. War ends. Hate doesn't have to. Third finger. Three, real victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's preserving your humanity while doing so. If you can fly and fight and still remember that person on the other side is human, then yes, join, serve, make me proud. But if you lose your humanity in pursuit of victory, then you've already lost no matter how many battles you win. Tyler stood, hugged his grandfather. Long, tight embrace. Thank you, Grandpa. Marcus held him, feeling the boy's strength, his future, his choices ahead. Now go inside, tell your grandmother dinner's ready, and think about what I said. Tyler went inside. Marcus sat alone on the porch looking at the stars. Somewhere up there, invisible in darkness, an F-16 from Midland Air Force Base flew patrol. He heard its engines he recognized instantly. He smiled. 50 years. From Soviet trainee to Iraqi fighter pilot to prisoner of war to American citizen. From enemy of America to Texan. From warrior who killed to old man who understood. The journey had been long, painful, full of loss and learning. But sitting here on this porch in this country with his grandson deciding whether to wear the uniform, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the peace of victory, the peace of understanding. Of wisdom earned through suffering, of knowing that the machine that defeated him also taught him that American power wasn't just technology, but values. That the F-14 Tomcat's greatest weapon wasn't the Phoenix missile, but the mercy of the men who flew it. People ask me, he thought, do you regret fighting against America? Yes, every day. But I don't regret what I learned from it. That technology without wisdom is just destruction. That power without mercy is just cruelty. That victory without honor is just murder. The F-14 Tomcat could kill from 100 miles, but the men who flew it with honor, with mercy, they saved my life, not just in the sky, in my soul. And now I teach my grandson, be strong, but never forget to be human. Because in the end, that's what makes America great. Not the weapons, not the technology, the values, the belief that even in war, humans have dignity, that even enemies deserve respect, that power should be used to protect, not just destroy. Those are American values, and they're worth defending, worth dying for, worth living for. That's what I learned in the sky over Iran and Iraq all those years ago, from 100 miles away, from the eagle who taught me to land. Marcus finished his beer, stood slowly, his knees protesting as always. Tomorrow, Tyler would make his decision, and whatever he chose, Marcus would support him. Because that's what family does. That's what Americans do. He walked inside where Sarah was setting the table, where Tyler was helping, where life continued in its ordinary, beautiful way. And for the first time in 50 years, Marcus Ramon felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Home.